throwing flowers. You really thought she would be sweet.
What is happening, guys? Back again with another episode of the Tinted Visors podcast, episode 5 of the second season. We're going to get into some new contracts that were recently signed. We're going to go with our favorite lines all time. I'm going to get another top 3 segment going and then finish it off with some new captains of some captainless teams. With that being said, let's get into things. Before we get going, a classic. We're going to go with the card of the day. For me, I got a guy who moved this offseason. We're going to go with Mikhail Sergachev, hot prospects out of Fleer Showcase. It's number 2499. Fleer Showcase, honestly, a super cool set. They stopped doing it. I don't know why, but I think they should bring it back. I think this might have been one of the last seasons they ran it. But super cool card. Excited to see how he does in Utah. I think he still has a lot of upside. I think that contract, I think it can still be good for him. I think he can get, 50, 60 points as a defenseman. But yeah, excited for Sergey. That's my card of the day. Really like it.
Yeah, sweet card. Fleer is an old set that I also miss. I wish they continued it. But hopefully Sergachev gets an opportunity to be a number one D-man out in Utah and hope he has a productive year bouncing back from that injury. My card of the day here, we're going with the CHL card. We have a Drake Batherson CHL auto. The CHL set, I think it's super cool to rip. I haven't been able to rip it myself personally. But sweet Batherson card, got it for a reasonable price. Like Batherson as a player, and hopefully he can kind of break out this season on an Ottawa team that hopefully makes the playoffs, but we'll see.
Yeah, honestly, had a pretty good season already, pretty monster season, and I would love to see him. If they don't do well, I'd love to see him get traded, maybe go to contender and see what he can do in the playoffs. Moving on to some of the biggest news, Leon Draisaitl locks in for 8 years at $14 million. Caden, I'm going to throw it straight to you, but before I do, I got to give you props. You did hit it on the head with that 14 million AAV guess a couple episodes ago. You haven't seen that, go check it out. But Caden, what do you think about this deal? What does it mean for the Edmonton Oilers?
Big signing for the Oilers, making Draisaitl the highest paid player in the league by AAV. And it's a good signing, with the cap going up. I think Draisaitl is worth that, but it is a little concerning. He is the highest paid player in the league, but he's not even the best player on his team. You still have to extend McDavid in 2 seasons, and Bouchard is due as well after this season. So to me, the Oilers are just kicking the can a little further down the road. They keep their core together for this year. They can run it back, compete for Stanley Cup, but their window gets a bit tighter and their cap space is looking constrained moving down the line.
Yeah, like you said, I think it's a big win short term. I mean, it kind of gets that distraction out of the way and it doesn't have to linger throughout the season of whether he'll stay, whether he'll go. Like you said, McDavid is up in a couple seasons, and you got to think with that 14 million cap hit to Draisaitl, McDavid's looking at 16, maybe 17 million dollars. When you add Darnell Nurse's contract and then Bouchard's potential extension, you're looking at like $50 million for 4 players locked up. You kind of see with the Leafs how that doesn't really work out and how they can't sort of win with all that money going towards so little amount of players. So we'll see what this deal means for the Oilers moving forward in the long term. But like you said, short-term win for sure. The Oilers can stay competitive for another couple of years.
Now that Draisaitl's locked up, the focus moves towards winning a Stanley Cup, but to the offseason, locking up Evan Bouchard. Do you think the Oilers should sign him to a bridge deal, or do you think they try to lock him up long term?
I don't see too much sense in a bridge deal right now. I think, the shorter the term, I think the higher the cap hit would be. So I think you try to lock him up 8 years, and it's hard because you kind of look at Carlson numbers and try to see maybe $11-12 million, but you can also kind of look at Cale Makar, who makes, very underpaid $8 million, I think, for him. So I could see, maybe $8.5-9 million AAV for the 8 years for Bouchard. I don't think that's too crazy. But like I just mentioned, that's a lot of money tied up to those guys, so they better start winning now. And probably the second biggest signing of the past couple days, Seth Jarvis locks up 8 years for $7.9 million with the Hurricanes. Huge win for both sides. After losing so many guys this offseason, it's nice for them to get a win and get one guy locked up. And, I think he could be a point-per-game player in his career, just 67 points this past season, but I think he could explode. Just a little interesting note that he was originally the draft pick that was held by the Leafs and that went over in the Marleau trade. So just kind of funny sort of tidbit there, but good signing for both sides. I don't know what that means for guys like Raymond or Mercer or even Perfetti, but I have to think Lucas Raymond makes around that sort of contract.
Always fun to needle the Leafs any way we can. But yeah, they lock up Seth Jarvis. He's only 22, and like you said, mid-high 60s last year, expecting another step from him this year. But at the end of the day, that's Aho's winger of the future. They're going to be together for a long time. So huge dub for Carolina, especially with the offseason they've had.
Would you load up that top line and do Svechnikov, Aho, Jarvis, or would you kind of, balance it out between the top six?
I think just looking at their depth that they have now, I think you have to put Svechnikov on the second line just to help out Natchez a bit. You lost Teravainen, you lost Kuznetsov, you lost a lot of your forward depth, so I think they have to spread that out, go for like a 1A, 1B kind of situation in Carolina.
Moving on to the next piece of business, Caden and I both have picked our favorite line combinations of all time. Throwing out a quick honorable mention to the HBK line. Gotta love guys like Carl Hagelin, Phil Kessel. You throw Nick Bonino in there, and you have a really good second, third line that can perform in the playoffs. But I'm gonna go with the triplets. Can't go wrong with Tyler Johnson, Andre Platt, Nikita Kucherov. That year that they were formed, Tyler Johnson actually led the team in points with 72. And, when you look at a team that had, Steven Stamkos and Ryan Callahan at the time, you expect those big guys to lead the way. But it was, the triplets line that took them, to the playoffs, took them through the playoffs, went all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, ultimately lost to Chicago. But, I think if they can beat Chicago, Blackhawks don't become a dynasty. And I think if you add a couple more cups to Tampa Bay, that makes them a dynasty. If they can get, 3 within 6 or 7 years. But it's kind of short-lived. Eventually, Kucherov found point, and then Palat and Johnson stayed in the second and third lines. But, in their primes, that was, one of the best lines to watch in hockey.
Super exciting line to watch, especially watching them kind of carry Tampa through those playoffs. Just a little unfortunate to come up just a bit short. But yeah, going on to my favorite line, a couple honorable mentions here. We have the Purple Gatorade line, just had to shout them out. Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, and Elias Lindholm. Great line. Johnny would, hydrate them with the Purple Gatorade on the bench. And then I wanted to go with a line that has a name. So another honorable mention, we're going with the two Sedins and Alex Burrows. I think my favorite line to watch growing up, just watching the Sedins. And they were looking for a winger for a while, cycling guys through, couldn't find anyone to stick. And then Burrows came along, and he was like the third twin. They were like triplets. The telepathy on the ice was crazy. Tape to tape, just so fun to watch. My favorite line of all time, I think more so for the name, but going with the Lotto line, the Canucks, little recent. The Lotto line, the Lotto 649. So we're looking at Brock Besser, number 6, Elias Pettersson for the 40, and JT Miller with the number 9. Was popular in 2020, I think, when they first started playing together, and they were ripping it up for the Canucks. A lot of offensive production out of that line. Had to break it up, I think, just not enough scoring depth up and down the lineup, so had to shake it up. But they were super fun to watch and always producing when they were on the ice together.
Super powerful line, and you do see them kind of get back together in the last couple of minutes. If they're down by a goal, you throw those 3 out there, and they're going to give you their best chance to tie things up and maybe win the game. Moving on to the next segment, we're going to go with the Triple T segment, top 3 time. Kind of stupid, just made it up right now. But we're going to go with the top 3 candidates to get their first 100-point season this upcoming season. For my first candidate, I kind of got a duel with William Nylander and Mitch Marner. Nylander came up 2 points short this past season, and I think, with the way his career has gone, he's just getting better and better. Marner had 85 points, but only 69 games. So if you give him for a full 82 games, I think he's primed for a 100-point season. Second candidate, I've got Braden Point, 90 points this last season. With Stamkos leaving, I think he takes an even bigger step forward, an even bigger role is put on to him. And, playing with Kucherov, you're always going to rack up the points. And then last but not least, Caden's mentioned this a couple times, but I got to go with Jack Hughes. 99 points 2 years ago, 74 points in limited 62 games this past season. But the kid is a stud. He knows how to put the puck in the net and how to find his teammates. And like we both mentioned, we're really high on New Jersey, and we think they can do well. And I think with him at the helm, he's primed for 100, 110 plus season.
Yeah, those are all great picks. And, 2 of them in particular are really great picks. Why? Because I also picked them. So with the first one, I also took Braden Point. Like Stamkos leaving, I think playing on a line with Kuch and Gensel, if they can stay together for the whole season, I think he can explode 50-50 kind of year. Next one, I also had Mitch Marner. 99 points is his career high. And like you said, struggled to stay healthy last year. So give him that full 82 games. I think, he can go for 105, 110 next season. And finally, the hottest take of all of them, I think, just considering his situation and his position, you could say, we're going with Cale Makar, who, best defenseman in the NHL. I will give him that. I think he is better than Quinn Hughes. But he will rely heavily on that power play. He had 39 power play points last year, so will need a slight uptick in that to, I think, hit 100. He had 90 last year. But when you're playing in an offense like Colorado, as explosive as Colorado, I think, sky's the limit. The ceiling is very high for him. I think he could very well hit 100 next season.
I like that pick. I like Cale Makar. I mean, you would think it's impossible, but Carlson did it a couple of years ago. And, if he can get up to 94, 95, the last couple of games of the season, they'll just be feeding him pucks and trying to get him to just at least touch the puck before it goes in the net. Got to rack up 100 points with Cale Makar. And last but not least, we're going to hit you guys with our choice for the new captains of all captainless teams left in the NHL. Starting alphabetically, we're going to go with Anaheim. For me, it's got to be Mason McTavish. I think they're just waiting for him to take that next step. If you asked me a year ago, I would have said Cam Fowler, but the fact that it hasn't happened yet just kind of makes me think that he won't be the captain, even though he is captain material. So I think they are waiting for McTavish to really break out, and then they can hand him the C. I don't think it'll be this season, but probably next season.
Wow. I didn't have that guy written down, actually. I did think about him, but just figured he was a little too young right now. So yeah, I went with Cam Fowler, but he only has 2 years left on his contract. He's only 32, so if they do want to give him the C and then kind of, have him be like the segue into Mason McTavish, like further down the line, that could work. But if they want to give a C to someone, locked up, if they want to go that route, if they don't think Fowler will stay, I think they give it to Troy Terry. He is locked up. He's been a key piece of that Duck rebuild, and hopefully he can lead them, back to the promised land. Moving on to the Buffalo Sabres, not too much to choose from after Okposo left, but I think they go with the youth movement. I think they go with Rasmus Dahlin, kind of the oldest of the young guys, went first overall back in 2018. But I think if anyone's going to lead Buffalo back to the playoffs, I think it'll be him on that blue line, super steady defenseman. He's my pick for the C.
Yeah, I've also got Dahlin at that sort of number one spot, but I've also kind of had him tied there for, my number one choice with Dylan Cousins, just with a guy that you want to show or lead by example on the ice. He's going to give it his all every single night. Bit of an off season this past one, but I think he can bounce back and really sort of be, that workhorse from Whitehorse that everyone calls him. Tage Thompson would be a close second pick for me, but I think it's more realistic to be between either Rasmus Dahlin or Dylan Cousins. Going with Chicago, I think they're just waiting for Bedard. Not necessarily this season. I think McDavid was his second season. I think he was named. I think they would have done it by now, or maybe they're waiting for the season opener to maybe name Bedard. But I think if it was going to be Jones or even Foligno, it would have been done last season. So I don't think there's going to be any segue until Bedard. I think they're just going to wait for him to really sort of embrace that leadership role and then give it to him when he's ready.
Yeah, I think this is an absolute no-brainer. I think it's going to Bedard, and if not this season, I think definitely next. But I don't really see a point in them naming Seth Jones or Nick Foligno captain when you're going to give it to Bedard in the next year or two. So props on them for waiting. They could be waiting closer to the regular season, like you said, maybe create some more buzz and excitement around this team. But yeah, this season or next, I think Bedard to be the captain is basically a lock. Moving on to the Seattle Kraken, I think this one we're going to have some different opinions, but maybe it's because there's not too much to choose from. So I have two options here. I think if they decide to wait, I think they give it to Matty Beniers, their number 2 overall pick back in 2021. I think they wait, let him develop, let him, bounce back from that sophomore slump. I think they give him that C in, 2-3 seasons. But if they want to give it to someone next season or, the season after that, I think it goes to Vince Dunn. He's been the number 1 defenseman on that team. I think he can lead them. There isn't much to choose from with the Kraken, a lot of, older guys, but Vince Dunn in his late 20s, I think they could give him the nod.
Yeah, I think I had sort of Dunn and Beniers as honorable mentions, but for me, I went with a guy never won the C before. I'm going to go with Jordan Eberle. To me, he just seems like the big leader on that roster. Him as well as, maybe even a Jared McCann. And I think either of those guys would be a nice segue into Matty Beniers in 2 or 3 years, like you said. But I think if, they do it right away, I think Jordan Eberle could be a good candidate. I was kind of thinking maybe Montour, but I think it would be best for them to sort of go with someone that they picked in the expansion draft or like Beniers picked in the entry draft. But for me, I'm going to go with Jordan Eberle. Next up, it pains for me to go with the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is probably the biggest no-brainer for me. It's got to be Victor Hedman. He's been with them through, finishing, in the bottom half of the league, winning President's Trophies, winning Stanley Cups. If I had to pick a second choice, it'd be Braden Point. But, Victor Hedman, he deserves a C, and I think he'll be named as soon as, opening night for the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, this is very similar to the situation in Boston, from Chara to Bergeron and then Bergeron to Marchand. I think it's very similar. Stamkos to Hedman, also a no-brainer. Would love to see him get that C. Last but not least, we have the newest team in the NHL. We have the Utah Hockey Club. I'm going to go with Clayton Keller. I think it's very similar to the situation in Buffalo. He's like the oldest of the youngsters. I think he leads that youth movement in Utah and, will be the face of that franchise when they make the playoffs.
It's always such a weird thing to say that they're the newest franchise, even though. But anyway, yeah, I got the same pick. I got Clayton Keller just because he bought in, long term when they were the dumpster fire of the league, and now they're sort of on the come up, and I think he really deserves that C. I could see the A's going to Nick Schmaltz or even Mikhail Sergachev. One note I did write down, it'd be kind of cool if further down the line maybe Josh Doan got that C, maybe sort of follow his father's footsteps. Obviously, different franchises now, but I think that would be really cool. Who knows where it happened, but Clayton Keller deserves a C. I think they should name it this year for him. That wraps up the content for this week's episode. Not too much news coming out. No more offer sheets. No more, big trades or anything like that. Season is coming up really soon. Let us know what you guys think. Give us your thoughts on who you think will become their first 100-point season player, as well as we think the new captains of some of the captainless teams are.
We should start to see some RFAs start to fall, like the dominoes falling with them getting signed and us getting closer to the year. But hockey season is almost upon us. Just a few more weeks. Just buckle down, hunker down. A few more weeks and we're there, guys. We are almost through the off season.
That being said, until next episode, we'll see you soon.
I don't be getting my flower. You really thought she would be sweet. It's a whole nother level of sour. 100 Batman a week. 100